For 15 years, a father in rural Minnesota sent his missing daughter's birthday card to the same mailbox, an empty slot at the end of a desolate county road. Every year, same card, same message, "I'll never stop looking." Everyone told him to give up. The police said she'd run away. The neighbors whispered darker things. But then, in 2021, he received something no one expected, a card back. No return address. Just 5 words written in her handwriting. "I remember the Red Room." That single sentence cracked open one of the most disturbing unsolved cases the Midwest had ever seen, because the only person who knew about that room was the man who built it. In the fall of 2006, the fields outside Windham, Minnesota were already turning brittle from early frost. The corn stalks stood like jagged shadows in the dusk, and the wind carried that eerie kind of silence that only small towns can produce. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you even stepped outside. For Alan Whitaker, a retired mechanic and lifelong resident, it was also the last place he'd seen his daughter, Hannah. She was 17, quick-witted, a little rebellious. The kind of girl who wore combat boots to church and painted her bedroom ceiling with constellations she memorized from a book. She and Alan had their fights about curfews, about boys, about whether she'd leave for college the moment she turned 18, but beneath the friction there was a bond. A tight one. Alan's wife had died when Hannah was 10, and ever since it had been just the two of them in the old farmhouse outside town. He cooked. She blasted music too loud. They argued. They forgave. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. On the night of October 12th, everything changed. Hannah was supposed to be at a study group. Alan remembered the conversation vividly. She'd popped her head into the garage and said, "Back by 10, promise. We're cramming for trig." She even made him pinky swear not to call if she was 10 minutes late. That was Hannah. Dramatic and specific. 10 came and went. Then 11. By midnight, Alan was driving a loop around the school, then the diner, then the one gas station open past 9 p.m. By 2 a.m. he was at the sheriff's office. They filed a report. They asked the usual questions. Had she run away before? Was there trouble at home? Drugs? Boyfriend problems? Alan answered with tightening fists. No. 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 She'd left her phone charger, her contacts case, and her favorite hoodie behind. None of it made sense. The deputies promised to circulate her photo, check local bus stations, ask around. But as the days turned into weeks, the urgency dimmed. The sheriff quietly suggested that maybe she had run off. Maybe to the cities. Maybe with someone. Alan never bought it. He knew his daughter. She didn't vanish. She was taken. But no matter how many flyers he stapled, how many tip lines he called, nothing came back. Hannah Whitaker became another poster on a bulletin board of ghosts. By year 2, the calls from police slowed to nothing. By year 5, they stopped altogether. But Alan didn't. Every October 12th, he mailed a birthday card to the same location, mailbox number 18 on Keaton Ridge Road. It was a back road near the river where he and Hannah used to fish in the summer. She loved that place. It wasn't attached to a real address, it was just a box he'd rented at a decommissioned post office converted into storage units. He didn't expect her to check it. It was a ritual. Something to say, "I still believe." Inside each card, he wrote the same 6 words, "I'll never stop looking for you." 15 years passed. Then, in 2021, something changed. Alan was walking back to his truck after picking up groceries when he saw it, an envelope in his windshield wiper. No stamp. No markings. Just his name, Dad. He opened it in the driver's seat. Inside was a card. Plain. The kind you'd buy at a dollar store. And inside that 5 words in handwriting he would have known in his sleep. "I remember the Red Room." He froze. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke. Some twisted person who'd read about the case online. But then he read the message again. The handwriting was Hannah's. Not just similar, it was hers. Messy loops, the exaggerated Y, the way she dotted her I's slightly to the left. And the words, those 5 words, meant something only he would understand. When Hannah was 12, she and Alan had built a storm shelter in the barn. Just a small underground room with reinforced walls. She insisted on painting it. Chose a deep crimson color from the hardware store. "I want it to feel warm, like Mars," she'd said. They called it the Red Room. No one else knew about it. It wasn't even visible unless you moved 2 hay bales and lifted the trapdoor. Alan drove straight home, heart thudding so loud he thought he'd pass out. He didn't tell anyone, not the sheriff, not the neighbors. Not yet. Instead, he went out to the barn. The trapdoor was still there. Still sealed. Still red inside. Nothing had been disturbed. So how after 15 years did Hannah remember? The message didn't include a return address. Just the 5 words. But it was enough. Alan took the envelope to the sheriff's office the next morning. This time they listened. The case was reclassified as an active missing persons investigation with evidence of possible contact. They brought in handwriting experts, retested old evidence. A DNA swab from the envelope came back with partial markers. Not conclusive, but consistent with Hannah's. The media got wind. Headlines splashed across regional networks. 15 years later, Minnesota girl may still be alive. But for Alan, it wasn't a news story. It was a promise. He'd never stop looking. Now someone had finally answered. The sheriff asked if there were any other secrets. Any other private places Hannah would know. Alan shook his head until he remembered something else. When she was in 8th grade, she had a habit of stashing notes in library books. Not random books, specific ones. Ones she knew no one else read. Sci-fi paperbacks. Old astronomy guides. He remembered once finding a sticky note inside a dog-eared copy of The Stars Are Ours. That read, "If you find this, I was here." The sheriff authorized a quiet sweep of the county library. 2 days later, in the back of a weathered copy of Voyage to Arcturus, they found a folded piece of paper. It was dated October 2020. And it read, "He keeps us underground. In the red. No windows. Just dark. Please don't stop." The message found inside the library book shattered every lingering doubt. This wasn't a hoax. Someone had planted it intentionally, likely Hannah, and they had done it recently. The page wasn't faded or torn. The ink was fresh. And the phrasing, the language, it sounded like a voice struggling to stay sane. He keeps us underground. Us. That word hit Alan like a punch. She wasn't alone. She hadn't just been taken. She was being held with others. The sheriff's department escalated immediately. The FBI was called in. Evidence was reprocessed. Search parameters widened beyond Wyndham. The note implied movement. If Hannah had left the card on Alan's truck windshield and planted the note in the library, she was being allowed to leave sometimes. Or maybe she was escaping in brief windows, long enough to cry out without being caught. But who was he? And what was the red? Alan knew the red room in the barn wasn't it. That had been a childhood project. Safe. Innocent. Whoever had taken Hannah had stolen that name and twisted it into something horrific. Something controlling. The red room now meant captivity. Blood. Memory. Trauma. The FBI established a profile. They believed the suspect was older, someone familiar with the town, the land, the routines. Someone careful, calculated. This wasn't a violent abduction done on impulse. It was methodical. The fact that she was still alive 15 years later pointed to long-term control, coercion, psychological manipulation. It fit the pattern of someone who believed they weren't just keeping her but that they owned her. One agent, Agent Reynolds, took the lead. She was quiet, relentless, and had a reputation for solving cases that had gone cold for decades. She met with Alan personally, listened carefully, asked for every name of every person who had worked on their farm, delivered packages, or come and gone from the area in the year leading up to Hannah's disappearance. Alan gave her over 50 names. She didn't flinch. Meanwhile, they combed through missing persons reports from nearby counties. It turned out Hannah wasn't the only teenage girl who had vanished in the early 2000s. A few had left notes suggesting they were running away. Others had no trace at all. But one detail kept popping up, references to being watched. A girl named Jenna in 2004 had told her teacher she didn't like using the school bathrooms because he stands near the vent. Another, from 2 counties over, had kept a diary that included the sentence, "I think someone's living in the silo." That silo turned out to be abandoned. Nothing there. No fingerprints. No leads. But when Agent Reynolds connected the timelines, a disturbing map began to form. A triangle. 3 towns. 3 girls. all gone between 2001 and 2007, all within a 60-mile radius. And then it stopped. No more disappearances after Hannah. Had he moved? Had he changed victims? Or had he kept her? Claire Jennings, the forensic linguist brought in to analyze the notes, noticed something subtle. Both messages on the card and in the book used phrases Hannah had used as a teenager. Don't stop. It was something she always said when Alan would tickle her as a kid. A joke that carried into her teens when they were mock wrestling over the remote or play fighting in the kitchen. The phrase became a secret code, don't stop, which always meant the opposite, keep going. But the tone of her note in the book? That was different. It wasn't playful. It was exhausted. That alone told them she'd written it under stress. Carefully, knowing it might be her only chance. Then came the breakthrough. Surveillance footage from a gas station 20 minutes outside Wyndham captured a woman who resembled Hannah entering the bathroom around 2 a.m. alone. The clerk hadn't noticed anything at the time. But when agents slowed down the footage, they saw it on the mirror, scrawled in soap. Still in red. Find me. She had managed to leave a third message. Agent Reynolds traced the receipt records from that night. One credit card purchase. A man in his late 60s. He paid in cash for gas but used a card for a coffee and pack of gum. His name, Gerald Dean Sims. A ghost. No criminal record. No traffic tickets. But he had a land parcel registered under a family trust 30 miles from Wyndham, 30 acres of forest, an old hunting cabin, and, according to records, an underground root cellar built in 1978. No electricity. No utilities. No neighbors for miles. The agents got a warrant. Alan wasn't allowed to go. They told him for his safety. He waited outside the sheriff's office, pacing in the cold. At 9:13 a.m., Agent Reynolds called him. 3 words, we found her. Hannah had been inside the underground cellar. Alive. The red was literal. The walls of the room had been painted with faded barn paint, deep crimson, cracked, peeling. The air smelled of rot and bleach. A cot. A chair. A chain bolted to the wall. A shelf with paperback books, some so worn the covers were falling off. She was thin. Pale. But when Reynolds approached, she didn't scream. She just said, "Is my dad here?" Gerald Sims was found in the woods nearby. Dead. Suicide. A hunting rifle and a note. She was mine. I kept her safe. The world doesn't understand. Inside his cabin, they found hundreds of pages of handwritten notes. Obsessions. Recordings. Claimed he was protecting her from a corrupt world. He believed Hannah was his spiritually. That she had been sent to him. Classic delusional psychosis, but hidden beneath a mask of normalcy for decades. But none of that mattered now. Because Hannah was free. She had survived. And the Red Room was no longer a prison, it was evidence. A wound that could finally be treated. Alan saw her an hour later at the hospital. She was fragile, gaunt, trembling. But when she saw him, she smiled. The first thing she said was, "I told you I'd come back." The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Alan sat in the corner chair, gripping a foam cup so tightly it bent under his fingers. Hannah lay in the bed, an four in her arm, eyes too big for her face. Her hair was cropped unevenly like she'd cut it herself with dull scissors. Her skin was paper-thin and pale, but her voice was steady. They sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes before either of them spoke again. Alan didn't know where to begin. "How have you been?" sounded absurd. "I missed you" felt like a scream wrapped in a whisper. So he said nothing. And then Hannah reached out her hand, placed it over his, and said, "I didn't forget." That was the crack in the dam. Alan leaned forward, buried his head into her frail shoulder, and wept, not just for what he'd lost, but for what he still had. Over the next few days, Hannah began to talk. Slowly. In pieces. She was lucid but exhausted. The trauma hadn't stolen her memory, it had rearranged it. Moments came back in flashes, often triggered by smells or sounds. The sound of gravel under tires made her flinch. The smell of bleach brought tears to her eyes. But she wanted to talk. She needed to. Gerald Sims had taken her the night she left for her study group. He hadn't been a stranger. He'd done odd jobs for their neighbors for years, tree trimming, pest control, hauling scrap. She remembered him being at the gas station a few times when she'd stopped after school. Quiet. Harmless. She thought he was just one of those small-town loners. He'd asked for directions that night. Said his GPS wasn't working. She thought it was nothing. Just helping a neighbor. He offered her a ride, said he needed help finding a property on Keaton Ridge. She agreed. But instead of turning toward town, he took a hard left into the trees. That's when she knew. He didn't strike her. Didn't scream. He spoke softly like everything was normal. Like she was being rescued, not taken. He kept repeating, "You'll understand later. You're chosen." When they arrived at the cabin, he led her inside, gave her soup, and locked the door. She tried to escape that night, broke a window, tried to run, but he was fast. Strong. He dragged her down into the cellar, chained her ankle to a bolt in the wall, and that's where she stayed. At first, it was terrifying. Screaming. Crying. Days without light. Then came the conditioning. He fed her, kept her clean, spoke to her gently like a twisted parent. He said he was protecting her from the world. That her father didn't care. That no one was looking. But Hannah remembered the red room. And she remembered the birthday cards. Sims let her out in small doses under supervision. He told her the world was still dangerous. That he'd trained her to be safe with him. She didn't believe him, not fully. But after a decade underground, her sense of reality had blurred. Still, every time she saw an opening, a chance to leave a mark, she took it. The note in the book. The message in the gas station mirror. The card on the windshield. The only way to stay sane, she said, was to leave breadcrumbs. And finally, someone had followed them. The FBI spent months combing through Sims's journals and property. They found more than just Hannah's story. Files. Maps. Notes on other girls. Most had escaped or disappeared, but a few had never been found. One case dated back to 1992. Sims had likely been preparing for years before he took Hannah. But she was the one who broke his pattern. She left evidence. She reached out. She fought. As the public learned of the story, headlines exploded. Survivor of 15-year abduction found alive. Red Room killer identified. Daughter's handwritten note solves cold case. News fans camped outside the hospital. True crime podcasts dedicated entire seasons to her story. But through it all, Hannah remained grounded. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted a life. The state offered her a new identity. Trauma specialists, relocation assistants. But Hannah refused to change her name. He took enough, she said. He doesn't get this. Alan remodeled the farmhouse. Tore out the walls. Repainted everything. Every trace of that October night erased. But one thing remained, the red room in the barn. Hannah visited it once. Touched the paint with her fingers. Stood in silence for 10 minutes. Then walked away. Later, she told her therapist she wasn't reclaiming it. She was releasing it. By spring, she was enrolled in community college under special protections. She majored in criminal psychology. Said she wanted to study people like Sims, not to understand them, but to stop them. And every year, on October 12th, she still gets a card. Same message. From Alan. I'll never stop looking. But now she gets to answer. I'm here. 3 months after Hannah returned home, her case was officially closed. The public record labeled her as a recovered victim, a phrase that couldn't possibly describe what she truly was, a survivor, yes, but also a witness, an architect of her own rescue. And the unexpected key that blew open a far darker truth than anyone in Wyndham had imagined. Because while her case was now closed, the case around Gerald Sims was only just beginning. The FBI had taken everything from the cabin, boxes of notebooks, cassette tapes, hand-drawn maps of rural land, even primitive blueprints for underground structures. Sims wasn't just a kidnapper, he was a builder. A planner. Someone who had refined a process over decades. His journals revealed patterns of stalking that went as far back as 1984. But what chilled investigators the most was a simple sentence scribbled repeatedly in the margins of one tattered notebook: 3 survive, 2 are gone, 1 was perfect. The implications were terrifying. 3 survivors? That would include Hannah. Possibly others. 2 gone? Presumed dead. But 1 was perfect? No one knew what that meant. And then they found the photographs. Tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Leaves of Grass was a stack of Polaroids, old, faded, but clear. Each featured a girl in a red-painted room. Some looked terrified. Others appeared disoriented. But one detail was always the same: each photo had a number scrawled on the back in red ink. The FBI traced them to 4 different missing persons cases across 3 states. Some had been labeled runaways. One was listed as a suspected drowning, though no body was ever found. Sims had studied these girls, tracked them, noted their routines, and then erased them. He built his persona carefully, always the quiet handyman, always available, never suspicious. He changed his last name frequently, using minor spelling variations or phony middle initials. When one location got too warm, he relocated. And each time he found properties with seclusion, access to utilities, and one critical feature, a basement or root cellar. He'd left behind false trails, too, planted evidence to suggest girls had simply run away. Letters written in their names. Staged items dropped near bus stations. He was meticulous but not arrogant. He didn't taunt police. He didn't crave recognition. He craved control. That was why Hannah had been his final target. She disrupted that control. Even in captivity, she had chipped away at it. Left messages. Clung to memory. She was not compliant. She was resilient. And now, thanks to her, the authorities had a framework to reopen multiple cold cases. Her story became the catalyst for justice far beyond her own. But recovery was never going to be easy. At home, Hannah struggled with everyday things most people don't think twice about: grocery stores with fluorescent lights, loud TVs, even showers that ran too long. The dark didn't scare her. Normalcy did. Schedules. Expectations. The sensation of not being watched. Alan had transformed the house. He removed all locks from the inside of doors. Installed soft, ambient lighting. The cellar was filled in with concrete. He even got rid of the barn altogether, burned it down after getting permission from the fire department. He said it was for firewood. But everyone knew why. Hannah didn't want him to do it. But he needed to. He needed to watch it burn. Some nights, she sat on the porch and stared at the empty patch where the barn once stood. She didn't cry. She wasn't numb. She was processing. One night, she told Alan, "The thing I hated the most wasn't the chain. It was the clock." Alan furrowed his brow. "The clock?" She nodded. He kept a small one in the red room. Battery-powered. Always ticking. It was the only sound when he left. Tick. 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 It made time feel like a punishment. Alan didn't know what to say. So he got up, walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out the small analog clock he used to keep by the window, and smashed it with a hammer. It was a small thing. But Hannah smiled. By the end of the year, Hannah joined Morgan Laney's advocacy group. Yes, that Morgan Laney, the sister of a girl featured in another unsolved case the FBI had linked to Sims. Together, they started a campaign called Voice in the Silence, designed to help survivors of long-term captivity reconnect with the world on their terms. They advocated for trauma-informed therapy, legal name retention rights, and resources for families who refused to let cold cases die. And quietly, steadily, Hannah began to heal. She planted tomatoes, took up drawing again, bought herself a set of astronomy books to replace the ones that had rotted in her room while she was gone. But she never repainted the ceiling. She kept the constellations faded and dusty. Because, she said, I need to know there's still something above me. Something I can't be locked away from. Alan supported her in every way he could, even when he didn't understand her decisions. When she wanted to go to therapy alone, he agreed. When she wanted to testify before the state senate about how kidnapping victims are treated legally, he drove her there himself. And when she wanted to return to the cabin site one last time, to stand above what had once been the red room, he held her hand and said, "You lead. I follow." They walked the trail together. The trees had started to grow back. Grass had covered the scars. But under the surface, they both knew what had happened there. And they knew it would never happen again. Because Hannah Whitaker had pulled herself out of the dark. She had survived the ticking clock. She had become the sound that broke the silence. By the second year of her return, Hannah Whitaker was no longer a ghost in her town. She was a presence. A reminder. Her name, once whispered in sorrow and pity, was now spoken with admiration, even reverence. But Hannah didn't want to be known as the girl who survived. She wanted to be the woman who used her survival. Her pain hadn't disappeared, it had simply learned to walk beside her, not in front of her. One day in April, she received a letter in the mail. No return address, but postmarked from Oregon. Inside was a single photograph. A Polaroid. Old, slightly warped with moisture damage. The edges were curling. But the image was unmistakable, a girl barely 16, sitting on a cot in a red-painted room, her expression empty, her hands folded in her lap. And behind her, a small round clock on the wall. Ticking. On the back, in the same red ink Sims had used in his twisted archives, was one number, number 2. Hannah froze. Her breath caught in her throat. This girl, she wasn't one of the victims already identified. Not Tess. Not Lily. Not any of the names the FBI had linked to Gerald Sims. This was someone else. She immediately called Agent Reynolds, who had remained in close contact ever since the trial. Reynolds listened carefully, then asked one question, "Are you sure it's real?" Hannah didn't hesitate. Yes. Because she knew the angle. The background. The posture. It was the same conditioning she had endured. Sims had numbered his victims, and now they had proof that the numbers stretched further than originally believed. Agent Reynolds launched a quiet investigation. No public press release. No panic. But internally, the Bureau reopened files from Oregon, Washington, even Northern California. Girls missing between 1995 and 2005. The list was longer than anyone wanted to admit. But Hannah wanted to help. She insisted on reviewing the photos. The timelines. The names. And then she saw her. Emily Rhodes, age 15. Disappeared in 1998 while walking home from her summer job at a county fair in Eugene, Oregon. Her parents believed she'd been lured by someone offering a ride. No witnesses. No vehicle descriptions. Just gone. But the girl in the photo? It was her. The photo was dated 1999. Meaning Emily may have survived at least a year after her abduction. But then, nothing. No bones. No belongings. No return. The FBI followed the photos chain. They tracked the paper to a vintage photo collector site in Montana. Someone had anonymously mailed a box of old items labeled estate cleanout. Inside were 3 more Polaroids, each marked with different numbers, number 1, 4, and 5. Hannah hadn't been the first. She'd been the third. Emily was number 2. And number 1? A girl named Alyssa Meeks, gone since 1994. Her face never appeared in the news again until now. Hannah sat with this knowledge for days. Not just that she had survived, but that she was one of several. That her survival was not a miracle in isolation, it was part of a chain. A broken one. And she was one of the only remaining links. She made a decision. With the help of Morgan Laney's nonprofit, she launched the Red Thread Project, an initiative to reconnect cold cases with new evidence. They worked directly with the FBI, local departments, and victim families. Within 6 months, her group had helped solve 3 separate missing persons cases. Not because they had bodies, but because they had patterns. Hidden ones. Like a signature carved in silence. And Hannah knew what to look for. She gave talks at trauma conferences. Not just about what happened, but how the brain survives. How it remembers. How it leaves clues. She explained the concept of mental breadcrumbs, subconscious details survivors drop even when they're too afraid to scream. A door left cracked. A note in a book. A whispered name into a mirror. She also spoke about rage. About how society wants survivors to be saints. But sometimes they need to be warriors. At one talk, a woman raised her hand and asked, "Do you hate him?" Hannah paused. Then she said, "I hate the silence he wrapped me in. I hate that he stole my voice. But mostly, I hate that he made other people think I was gone." The room was silent for a full 30 seconds. Then came the applause. Back in Wyndham, Alan had started restoring old cars again. Not for money, just for peace. His hands stayed busy. His mind calmer. Hannah often sat nearby, sketching or reading. One afternoon, he handed her a box. Inside were all 15 birthday cards he'd sent to mailbox number 18 over the years. She hadn't seen them until then. Each one was slightly yellowed, the ink faded. Each one had the same message. I'll never stop looking. She read them one by one, silently. When she got to the last one, she looked up at him and said, "You didn't find me. I found you." Alan smiled, eyes glassy. "Yeah," he said. "But I think we were both walking the same road." Hannah taped the final card above her desk. Not as a memorial. As a promise. Because somewhere out there, other girls were waiting. And now she wasn't just surviving for herself. She was looking for them. A year after the discovery of the Polaroids on the same October evening that had once haunted the Whitaker family for over a decade, Hannah stood at the edge of a small forest clearing in rural Minnesota. The ground beneath her was soft with fallen leaves. A gentle wind rustled the trees, and just beyond the clearing was a newly erected stone monument, modest but firm. Etched into it were 7 names. Each belonged to a girl once listed as missing. Each had, in some way, been touched by the legacy of a man who tried to make them vanish. Emily Rhodes, Alyssa Meeks, Lily Denton, Tess Laney, Riley Coster, and 2 names left blank, reserved for those yet to be identified. The stone was placed on the very land where Gerald Sims had built his last red room. The cellar had been filled in, the cabin razed, and the area designated as protected land by the state. No one would build on it again. No one would live there. It had become a place of remembering. Not for Sims. For the girls. Hannah read the names aloud. Not for the crowd behind her, not for the reporters, the agents, the survivors, or the grieving families. She read them for the soil, for the roots, for the silence that had once swallowed those names whole. She read them so the wind would carry them farther than any headline ever could. Then she stepped aside and let others do the same. One by one, families approached the stone. Some placed flowers. Others tucked small notes into the soil. Alan stood behind her the whole time, hands in his coat pockets, watching her, not like a father protecting something fragile, but like a man witnessing someone becoming. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the ceremony ended, Hannah walked alone into the woods. She followed a familiar path, the same one agents had taken the morning they found her. At a bend in the trail, she paused. From her pocket, she pulled out a small item, a battery-powered analog clock. It no longer ticked. She'd removed the mechanism. She placed it gently on the mossy ground, facing upward, and whispered, "Time's up." Then she walked away. In the years that followed, Hannah's work grew. The Red Thread Project expanded into multiple states, helped identify 7 more victims, and assisted in reopening over 40 cold cases. She testified before Congress on how long-term missing persons cases are mishandled. She helped create guidelines for how law enforcement tracks psychological patterns in abduction survivors. But even with all her advocacy, writing, speaking, and leading, she never stopped listening. She said survivors don't just heal in noise. They heal in silence, in presence, in knowing they aren't alone. Her message was never, "Look what happened to me." It was, "Here's how I fought back." She became a lighthouse for others lost in storms they didn't choose. She lived quietly in a cottage not far from where she grew up. She still visited the library often. Left notes and books, not because she had to, but because she believed someone, somewhere, might still be reading between the lines, looking for a way out. She never locked her door. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she refused to live like a prisoner in a world where she had already served someone else's sentence. And every year, on October 12th, 2 things happened. Alan mailed her a card that said, "I'll never stop looking." And Hannah sent one back, this time with 5 words of her own. "I found my way home."